Good afternoon, Bill. My name is Jim Burgess, and I'm here on behalf of Mount Holly Springs Heart and Soul. I'm with Bill Jacoby. Today's date is August 20th, and we are here to talk about baseball, Mount Holly Springs baseball to be specific, because Bill Jacoby, at one point in the early to mid 50s and into the 60s, played baseball at Mount Holly Springs, and he's here to talk about those days and the folks he remembers and some stories about playing baseball in Mount Holly Springs. So, Bill Jacoby.
Hello, Jim. You have questions you'd like to ask, Jim?
Sure. So, you evidently played baseball in high school. You played at Shippensburg. So, how did you get from Shippensburg playing baseball to playing an adult league in Mount Holly Springs?
Well, I played in the Shippensburg Teener League in the late 40s, and very unfortunately, my mother died in 1950 when I was just going into the 11th grade at Shippensburg High School, and we were all put out in foster homes, my brothers and sisters, in the Carlisle area, and mostly on farms. And so when the people I lived with on a farm moved to Mount Holly in 1953, I was able to resume my interest in baseball, and I went to see Jesse Stahl, and he welcomed me to the team, and I started playing. I think it was in 53 or 54, and went into the early 60s. So that's how I got down here. I played wherever Jesse needed someone. I played outfield, infield occasionally, and any questions you have, Jim?
Well, you're looking at a picture of the 1954 team, is that correct?
I think you have on here 55.
55. And so there are folks that you remember that are on that picture, and maybe you can say their names and perhaps what you remember about them. And tell us what it was like playing baseball back in those days in Mount Holly Springs.
Well, baseball back in those days was very, very competitive and very attractive because there weren't a lot of other sports that were equally popular. And when Mount Holly played a home game, was the place to be. We had outstanding crowds. We had a nice bleacher. We had dugouts on each side for the teams, plus an additional dugout-sized building that sold concessions, and even above the grandstand where people could sit, there was an announcer's booth where the games were announced over a public announcing system. It was just a place to be. Then, like, baseball was a big attraction. Mount Holly was very competitive. It was in the West Shore Twilight League. And this picture that Jim has shown me here from 1955 shows a lot of the players. Some worked shift work at different places. Some were going to college. Not all of them made the picture, but I can just elaborate a little bit on the ones I see in this picture and know a little bit about. Is that what you want, Jim?
Yeah, that would be great.
Back row, left to right, is manager Jesse Stahl, who was the manager the whole time I played.
He was pretty competitive, I think, right?
Yeah, Jesse was very competitive. But particularly Mount Holly and Mechanicsburg were very competitive because in most years, not every year, but most years, the end-up title winner would be either Mount Holly or Mechanicsburg. And the manager, Jesse Stahl, and the manager from Mechanicsburg, Bill Rickenball, who still, I think, manages clear up to this day, they were both very competitive and active recruiters because they knew probably at the end of the season it was going to be between their two teams who was going to come out with the trophy. Next to Jesse was Russell Nickel, who was just a loyal groundskeeper. Always put down the white lines for the fair territory and so on. Next to him was Bob Dunlap, who I think still lives in Mount Holly Springs, I believe, on Chestnut Street. was one of our pitchers. Next to him was Larry Thimkin, a pitcher, and could also, when needed, play first base or wherever Jesse would need him. Next to Larry Thimkin was Steve Koblish, a real good ball player in Carlisle League with Maslin's, and I think he got recruited by Jesse to come out and play for Holly. He was a pitcher, had quite an assortment of pitches, and also had a very competitive knuckleball. Next to Steve Koblish was Spiro Tulumas. Spiro ran the Holly Inn, lived on Chestnut Street, and when he could make it, get away from the inn, he would come and participate in the games. Middle row, left to right, in front of Jesse was Sylvester Brame. That's Sid Brame's father. Sylvester was one of our pitchers.
And you talked about quite the curveball that Sylvester
Yeah,
had.
he was a very good curveball pitcher. Had a tantalizing curveball that was quite effective. Next to him was Carl Nicholson in Carlisle, played first base for us. Next was Dick Klepper, who was also played first base or could be a utility player elsewhere where needed. Next was Pete Lindsey, nicknamed Pistol Pete because he had a very strong arm from shortstop.
So it was almost like a pistol going off when the
Yeah,
ball
I
hit the
think
mitt, huh?
when he would sometimes, I think, tease the base runner who hit the ball, Pete would scoop it up and give him a step or two toward first before even throwing over, and you could hear the first baseman's mitt crack. And I think hence came, hence came the nickname Pistol Pete. The next is the young ball player talking, Jacoby. I won't say much about him. Utility player. Play wherever Jesse needed someone on a particular night. Next was Ronnie Brownwell from Bowling Springs High School. Played a lot of third base. Good ball player. In the front row was Harry Conover, the president of the team. Bob Winters, I think is to this day is still on the South Milton School Board. Was very good at playing golf. Very good at catching. A good catcher. I think our first team catcher. Next was Pee Wee Shafer. Played second base.
So Pee Wee, how did he get a nickname like that?
The only way I can figure out he got that name because he was small.
Oh, okay.
He was I think he was about the shortest player on the team. And let's see. Clyde Miller, more of a utility player when needed, but I think he was like an extra first or third base coach, mostly. Can't recall what positions he played. Mel Ealing, another left-handed pitcher, and could also play wherever Jesse would need him. Jack Hallbacher, good ball player, short, and I think he played Carlisle High School football, and he's noted for that. And next to Jack is the scorekeeper for our team, Joe Kranga. We were very competitive. I think we had a very successful year that year. And
Now, a lot of the guys that you played ball with, you also worked with at the mill. Is that correct?
well, that's right. We had Leroy Brame played a lot of ball for the team and didn't make this picture. But at the Peter J. Schweitzer paper mill, Jesse Stahl worked there. Pete Lindsey. Ronnie Brownwell, myself. I don't know if I'm missing anybody else or not, but and Leroy Brain, I guess I mentioned him. But sometimes we would get off work at 3:30. But sometimes if you had to work overtime, you would ask to be excused at 5 o'clock, because a lot of times we had an away game a particular night. Could even be as far away as Enola or New Cumberland, and the games would start at 6. Sometimes we'd drive separately, but sometimes we'd all pile in one car, head directly from the paper mill, skip supper, head for Enola, Mechanicsburg, or wherever, take turns in the back seat putting our uniforms on. Sometimes some of them didn't get their uniforms on until we got to the field. Finish putting your uniform on, go out in the field and practice maybe for 5 minutes, and be time for the game to start. Got home and ate supper about 8 o'clock at night. That's just how loyal these fellas were to playing baseball back in those days, because it was just the thing to do.
So you mentioned that there was quite a rivalry between Mount Holly and Mechanicsburg, and that both Coach Rickenbaugh and Coach Stahl would recruit. Who were some notable recruits that Jesse Stahl brought to Mount Holly to play?
Well, I think I can't name a lot of them because over the years there were a number.
I've heard
Steve Koblish, Clyde Washington.
Talk to us a bit about Clyde Washington. He was quite an athlete in anything, correct?
Right. He was an outstanding athlete in Carlisle High School. I think he was a 4-letter man in there. And so he couldn't make every game every week for us, but Jesse had talked to him, I think, probably numerous times, and he would come out and play for Mount Holly on nights that he could make it. He would catch, he could play outfield wherever you wanted him to, and a good hitter.
And I would assume that Jack Hallbacher and Clyde Washington were teammates on the football team, potentially.
Potentially, I can't segregate the years, but Clyde was certainly a good ball player. Jack was a good ball player. I think Jack was even the quarterback. But
I think he was.
Yeah.
You mentioned a person by the name of Punk Ward, who was recruited by Jesse.
Yeah, Don Ward was his name, and he was, I don't know where he got the nickname Punk. A big dude. He would play first base when he could make the games. A tremendous hitter. I mean, people would ooh and awe sitting in the bleachers when he would hit a home run over the right field fence, clear those trees beyond the fence, and land up on the railroad tracks. Most guys had trouble hitting a long foul ball that would reach the railroad tracks. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the baseball games were really a family affair. I mean, the folks would play and their families would come, and most of Mount Holly would show up at those home games, correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, quite often you'd look back and the bleachers would wrap around behind the catcher there was a foul screen that covered pretty much the whole back area there, and the bleachers covered that same area right behind the foul screen. And quite often the bleachers would be full and people would be sitting down along the left field line, down along the right field line. Even out beyond the left field fence, there's pine trees where the road to the sewage plant goes in now, and people would be sitting out there in their lawn chairs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of pride in Mount Holly with the baseball team, I would assume, correct?
Oh, yeah. Even Charlie Wise, who was one of the, I think, trolley car operators for the Holly Trolley. He had a gas station up, which no longer exists now, up beside the Deer Lodge. And he was one of the team sponsors in a way that if you volunteered to drive to the away games a couple nights a week and took several players, and you came back home that night and dropped the players off, if you take your car up to Charlie Wise's gas station, he would fill your tank for you as the way he would sponsor the team.
So an in-kind donation, I assume, huh?
Right,
yeah.
Right, yeah.
Nice. So you learned all about teamwork on the baseball team, and you certainly would go from a situation where you were part of a work team, and then some of the same folks that you worked with at Schweitzer's were also part of the baseball team.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how teamwork is something that is one of your lasting memories of your experience in baseball.
Well, teamwork's essential to be successful, I think, at work or playing a sport. I don't know, you can't be an individual. You have to be willing to pick up a fellow player if he has an error, or go in as a base runner for someone who got a hit but has a bad ankle or something like that. That's why it's called a baseball team or a football team. It's there's, like I say, you've heard the old expression, there's no I in team.
Mm-hmm. And so, with Mount Holly Springs baseball, a lot that's walking down memory lane here today, looking back at those pictures and in your experiences. And at Mount Holly Springs Heart and Soul, we use stories to find out what matters most to the people that live, work, play, and learn in Mount Holly Springs. And certainly being part of something bigger than oneself, is probably the root of your pleasure of remembering back to those days. Would that be an accurate statement?
Well, yeah, Jim, I'd have to reflect on one thing. I think my wife was just telling you about it. Several nights when we had games where I would fill in for someone else, I'd be playing third base or shortstop. My wife and her father were adamant Mount Holly Springs baseball fans. They would attend almost every home game and sit along the third base line, right behind the third base coach. And eventually, as my wife got older, into her senior high school years, one of her friends that knew me, I did not know her father or her, but this fella went up and asked me if I wanted to go up to Sarah's home one evening and be introduced to her. I said, well, sure. Well, that led to me talking to her one night out in front of her house, and she recalls the later hour, I guess, when she walked back into the house and her father said her mother had passed away the year before. Her father said, now, you don't need to think you're going to start going out with those boys. And she said she told her father that was Bill Jacoby, who played for the Mount Holly team. And right away her dad said, I guess that's okay.
So baseball opened all kinds of doors for you.
Yeah, that's a incident we won't forget.
Yeah. So this year is what year as far as how long have you been married?
We've been married 61 years.
Oh my. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
And it all started with Mount Holly Springs baseball.
That's how it got started.
Right. So now there is no adult team in Mount Holly Springs. The West Shore Twilight League disbanded and the field has been dismantled, but there still is a memorial at the field. It's called Stall Field, and there's a historic marker there that honors Jesse for his service. So what do you think, what would you like to see happen with that memorial that's there as that space becomes repurposed for, at this point, we don't know what?
Well, I think whatever the field becomes repurposed for, it could still be called Stall Field. Stall Field doesn't say Stall Baseball Field, Stall Football Field, Stall Little League Field. It says Stall Field. I think it should remain prominent. Jesse dedicated a big part of his life to playing ball and then coaching ball and managing the team, and had some very successful teams, and I think it should be not destroyed or thrown away, but prominently displayed somewhere in that area.
So Jesse Stall's memorial is just a reminder how important community service is when you live in a small town.
Right. I think I agree with you.
And you were very active in your community as well as throughout your life. What are some community things you've been involved in?
Well, after playing for Mount Holly, I played for softball teams and fast pitch leagues and I coached the Bowling Springs varsity girls softball team for 3 years with Alex Quigley, and but other than that, mostly I've been involved pretty actively with the church, the Mount Holly Springs United Methodist Church, and I still am.
And that really was our connection back when I was growing up in Mount Holly Springs. You were my youth group leader from the Mount Holly Methodist Church, and that's how I got to know you and thought of you as a role model and a mentor, and really paved the way for my interest in the community and being active as a community volunteer.
Yeah, that's very complimentary to hear, Jim. I remember very well your brother, your mother and father, who now are both deceased, but we had a great relationship in church, and I think it's a great reminder of what fellowship can be.
And so we can learn from the past to really set the stage for the present. So thank you so much, Bill, for talking and reminiscing about Mount Holly Springs baseball. It's been a pleasure to hear the stories. Some of them I've heard before, some of them I haven't. And thanks so much again for doing this for us.
Yeah, you're quite welcome, Jim.